Happy Tuesday, wherever you're zooming in from. Um, Really excited about today's webinar. We'll get started in just a few minutes. How's the weather in Portland, Jim?
Rainy. What's what's Atlanta like today?
Atlanta's actually sunny today, 48 degrees. So, I like joking with people that are in colder weather, like, oh, although it was 18 degrees, which never happens in Atlanta just a few weeks ago.
Hmm. Lee, you're probably also cloudy and rainy. I take it.
Cl- Cloudy and rainy. Yep, it's one
Yeah.
of those days. But I think we're supposed to get some sun today.
That's why I think Seattle area is like fantastic for programming because there's just that season of the year where might as well go code.
Yeah. Lots of coffee too.
Lots of coffee. Totally. Yeah, we'll give it just a few more minutes and then we'll get started for the recording. Um, Again, we're really excited about this one because, a lot of times when we talk to different clients, there's I always call it people, process, and technology when you're trying to change your organization. And oftentimes everybody thinks it's technology's the hard part, but it really that people process or cultural change that maybe you're trying to do as part of a new way of operating is different. I think about it, we've gone from monoliths to microservices, but a lot of times the way we run and operate software is, not too different from how we did, 5, 6, 7 years ago. All right, let's go ahead and get started. If everybody's ready, and if you joined us late, we'll send out a copy of the recording so you can watch whatever you missed. Welcome, everybody, again. Happy Tuesday. As I mentioned, this is the webinar from New Relic to AWS, Secrets of Creating a Blameless Culture. And it's funny, there really are secrets. There's clear patterns that we've seen companies when they're really changing that culture to a blameless culture, to continuous learning. It really does make a big difference. And we're hoping to unpack kind of some of that transformative power, whether you're doing it at your company or you've been charged to, or maybe even watching this recording, because that's one of the reasons we're doing this. We have a lot of clients that, hey, listen, you've told us how to do things technically different. Help us understand how to do that culture. As we go through it, if you have any questions, the last session we had some great questions from the audience. Just feel free to jump in the Q&A or chat, ask them, and we'll catch those questions as we go. Anything's on the table, whatever you have in mind. And I'm going to ask Aaron if you could do a couple of just quick favors for me. Aaron, I don't know if you have the last replay. I know we've had some people. This is the second, we'll have a third part of the series again about that people, process, technology. This is kind of that second of that. So Aaron, if you could post the previous one in the Slack channel or in the chat channel when you get a chance. The other part I like to do, Aaron, is we just have a neat new white paper on Leo Labs. And Jim, you and I have talked about since we joined Blameless around a year and some change ago that incident management and doing a better job isn't just for software. I think Leo Labs is a great example where it's a company that actually kind of manages space debris and how that works, but again, working and what they've done. So if you could share that in there too. So let's go ahead and get started. Maybe we'll do intros first. I'll go quick. My name's Ken Gravanovic, COO of Blameless. So happy to be here with you, with the team. Prior lives, I've been at Cox, where I ran digital systems. Maybe you've heard of Kelly Blue Book Auto Trader. Jim Lee and I both all worked together at New Relic and prior lives. And I've done a bunch of other things going back to kind of before there was cloud computing, starting a company called web.com. So excited to be here. Jim, maybe if you could do a quick intro.
Yeah. Hey everybody. Jim Gochi. I'm the CEO of Blameless. Like Ken said, spent a lot of years at New Relic, and had the honor to be both on call, taking pages, fixing systems, building software, operating software, and then also in leadership positions. In a very high growth environment. So I have a real appreciation for reliability management, and in particular the incident response, during the incident and post incident workflows. And then this cultural component was very, very critical to us, and looking forward to talking about it today. Lee, over to you.
Sure, and I'm Lee Atchison. I'm the Chief Reliability Officer at Blameless. Now, I've worked at Amazon and AWS. I again worked with Ken and Jim at New Relic as well. Worked at Hewlett Packard and several startups over about a 35-year career so far. And I've seen firsthand the impact of fostering a blameless environment and unfortunately the huge pain that can come from blameful cultures. So I'm very much looking forward to this discussion. I think we can definitely have some great insights here.
Great. So maybe we'll kick off, Jim, with you is, one of the things I'm a big believer, certainly need a blameless culture everywhere, but in B2B SaaS, I think that's really important in particular because you're building software that's dynamic. You're constantly, you've already converted from a monolith to microservices, and you're constantly, changing things. So, it seems like it's really more, kind of making sure that you have that framework for learning and development. Jim, let's go to you first. Maybe you could share I think you did a great job at New Relic in different places. What's the kind of the keys to establishing a blameless culture? Maybe give an example from
Yeah.
New Relic.
Yeah, I mean, I'll start by emphasizing what you said with any kind of software product that's delivered over the internet, versus maybe back in the day, software was delivered on a CD-ROM. So if you're operating a software service, then in many ways, that is the business. So the software organization, DevOps organization is operating the business. That's very serious stuff, and it needs to be treated professionally. And so you have to really make sure that your team is managing, the reliability aspect in a very professional manner. So again, super, super critical that you do it right. You can't really escape it if you, try to hide things, if you have a culture of blame and things like that, it catches up with you. If it's a bad quality of experience, if it's a bad customer experience, that's going to really negatively impact you. So again, like ultimately, you will eventually have to confront these things head on. And like you said, it's got to start with a commitment, and it's got to start with what you would call culture. But you've heard me say many times, Ken, culture isn't what you talk about. So you can talk about things all day long. Culture is what you put into practice. Culture is what essentially you encode and process. And so if you're customer centric, well, prove it to me. What do you do that's customer centric? If you really want to have good reliability, what do you do to enforce that? And this concept of being blameless is a key pillar to it. And it really starts at the top, but it does work its way into the entire organization. It has to start at the top because this is how anything cultural operates. If leadership is saying one thing but doing another, it's a constant battle. You're never going to be successful. So you really got to make sure you get good buy-in. If you're in a leadership position, you have a lot to do here. If you're not in a leadership position, you got to figure out a strategy for kind of bringing your leadership team along and why these things are important and what the benefits are, and then what they need to do to participate. But I would say it starts at the top, but it goes much deeper, and we'll get into the details on this webinar.
Yeah, Jim, any example that you could think of at New Relic that you set that as, kind of at the beginning? I know you were very purposeful with the culture you're creating at New
Yep.
Relic, but maybe just an example of kind of what that looks like of,
Yeah, here's one example. Every week we would give airtime in our conference room, which was our lunch room, but we also had an AV set up, and we would talk through major incidents that we had, what happened, and what we did about it. And so it was very public. We gave people permission to describe what went wrong, and these things are often viewed as like, well, mistakes, but things happen, things go wrong all the time. But if people witness that you can talk about these things in public, and then the team has learned from them, and so you public disclosure, public admittance, and public learning, this is a very powerful tool as one example of a tool. And I would show up at these, I would sit in the audience, I would ask questions, and I would basically thank the teams for the hard work that they're doing to try to operate the system better, fewer outages, more effectively. And so just reinforcing that it is okay to make these things public and to work through them. Again, that's just one example, and of course there are others.
Yeah, and I think it's so important when you mentioned as a leader. I'll just share one little story. I won't say which company, but it's a large company that operated systems that generated hundreds of millions of dollars through it, and it was a smaller system. And I really had I'd only been on the job probably 3 or 4 weeks, and I got called up to the operations area, and someone admitted that they had just made a mistake, and they told me that they had on the production database for this particular system made a live change where they forgot the where clause on a select statement. And now all of the pictures were all the same for like 100,000 different listings. And it was okay because we didn't have that till the next morning. But, again, this is a great example. As I could have said, well, how would you made a change in the production, all those kind of things. But, first of all, I appreciate it. Hey, thank you for that honesty. That helps us understand what's going on right away. And then again, digging under that, like there was a reason why that person was making changes on the production database, because it turned out that the software team had never prioritized building a back office, and sometimes customers had changes. It wasn't a great thing, so things got uncovered and fixed. But I think, Jim, you made that point, is the past is the past. It's really about what we learn to improve for the future, because so many times it's like, let's just hit on what happened. But really, the only reason that's useful is to learn for the future. So totally agree. Lee, let me go over to you for a second. I know like technology plays a significant role in kind of supporting a blameless culture. Can you discuss either some tools or practices, especially focusing on incident management, that you think might be helpful to people on this call?
Well, sure. So tooling can be, a major supporter of building a blameless culture, but the same tooling, though, used differently can actually encourage a blame-based culture. And that's kind of the important thing about tooling. There's no perfect solution tooling that solves all of the problems, But it is unfortunate there are some tools, for instance, like Git, that has built into it, the feature in Git that tells you the history of changes that occurs with code that's changed is called the blame feature. So even the naming of some of these features sometimes doesn't support the blameless culture. But tooling can help immensely when you build the blameless culture. And the key is to differentiate tooling that encourages data-focused decision-making and focusing on two questions: what happened and how can I fix it, as opposed to tooling that focuses on, or questions and use of tooling that focuses on, who caused the problem and why did they do it. What and how are the questions that should be asked, not why and who.
Can I jump in one second? Because I learned this lesson at an early age. Actually, my dad was a home builder. And so I'd work for him. I was in my teenage years, and quality control was a little iffy, back then when I was young. And I remember my best friend and I were helping him out one summer building a house, and we were putting some wallboard up, and we really did a very bad job. And my dad came by and he's like, "Well, what happened here?" And my friend and I were so busy like trying to blame each other for what had happened. And he said, "I don't really, care how we got here. All I care about is what we're going to do to fix it and move forward." And Lee, it's like this is essentially the essence of what that looks like. It doesn't, in many ways, it doesn't really matter how we got here. It's not great, but what are we going to do going forward? And in particular, how do we not get here again? That's really got, you can't just be stuck in the same loop, but a focus on the future, a focus on fixing, a focus on getting better, that, sort of de-emphasizes the blame.
That's
That
right.
you can, otherwise, that's the flip side of the way to look at it.
And I think we're going to probably talk about, postmortem specifically, but when I talk about what and how, there's two parts to the how question. There's how do we fix this so that we get ourselves back up and running again. But the more important how question is, how do we not do the same thing again? And that's really the question that replaces the who and why, because who and why is directed at, well, how could this happen? Get rid of it, stop it from happening. But you really want to ask is, how do we prevent this from happening in the future? The do not repeat.
Yeah, I always like to call it the do not repeat plan. but
Yeah.
some people call it correction of errors. Some people call it all different types of things. Jim, one of the things I like to hit on next, because I think, we see this is a lot of people like they know, let's say the way they do incident management is super inefficient, or they know that the culture is not quite right. Because it's amazing where I've seen, you think about the old, engineering versus product. There are still some companies that now they've got microservices, but they hired people they called SREs, but they treat and organize just like the old operation. So you still have that old conflict that it really hurts. And I think that the thing that a lot of companies don't realize is there's actually a huge financial cost, to companies, if you have a blame-filled culture. And I think a lot of people don't really understand that aside from it's a good thing to do, makes people enjoy their jobs more. It's actually a fantastic and a necessary business decision to have a blameless culture. But maybe you could talk about kind of some of the hidden impacts that you've seen, blameless,
Yeah.
blame-filled, and what companies should be thinking about that, maybe even in business terms.
Well, I think you actually started it at the right level, which is at the highest level of a digital business. If you have a blame-filled culture, you're going to see it at the top line. It's going to affect revenue, and you're going to see it customer satisfaction. You're going to see it insurance, everything that affects the top line. So, word of mouth is going to be bad. Customers are going to churn. Getting new customers is going to be harder. And then the bottom line of your cost and how much effort you're putting in is also going to be higher, right? And so these are often not well understood. But if you think about it, in a blame-filled culture, what happens is people tend to hide from problems. They don't address problems, they hide from problems. So there's very poor, visibility, transparency is non-existent. But within the company, people sort of get wind that things aren't going well, but no one's talking about them. It's like, I thought the website was down. Well, engineering isn't saying anything about it, because like someone's afraid they're going to get blamed. So no one, basically people didn't come clean. And so what does that do? Like if you were in a sales role or if you were in a customer support role and you knew the website was flaky, you had reliability issues and things like that, you'd lose confidence. You'd lose your confidence in the product, the offering. You'd lose your confidence in the engineering team, the company, right? Because you just don't trust them. So it's the classic thing, like, I know your group had this problem, but you're not forthcoming with the information flow. So I don't trust you anymore, Ken, and I don't trust your team anymore. This is really a problem, and you start to get the siloing effect within the company. And then internally, then it's like one group is blaming another group internally, and it goes back and forth and it goes round and round. So culturally, you just really kind of have a mess on your hands. That will show up again. Customers are being impacted. If customers are saying there's an issue and your engineering team is saying we don't, there's no issue, think about that situation, right? It's a terrible situation to be in. So, and then, also if an organization is not confronting its problems, it's not learning from them and fixing them. So that goes to the expense side. How much energy is being put into responding to incidents that keep reoccurring? You're never learning from them. You're never addressing them. Like, just think about all that wasted time and energy and stress too, because, the thing with an incident, it's not just time, it's also a lot of stress on the organization.
Right.
And so that's just like a lot of organizational waste is happening if you're just not really confronting it directly. So, okay, well then what does that mean? It means that often, the teams that would have been doing some other work, more productive work, are getting dragged into these incidents continually, and there's really no transparency. So, it's like this negative cycle. If you're wondering why your project roadmap is slowing down, it may be because you have a lot of incidents going on behind the scenes and people just aren't coming clean about it, right? So again,
Yeah.
very holistically, you can see what happens if you really kind of have that blame-filled culture.
If I can interject 1 second too, Ken, going back to your example with the database guy that admitted that he made the
It was
update
actually a
without a where
customer support
clause.
person that did it. Yeah, but yes,
A customer support person.
tech
Okay.
ops, tech ops.
Yeah. But the fact of the matter is, in a blameful culture, the mindset of that person would have been, what do I do to make sure I don't get in trouble? And that would have included, possibly not saying anything, going, trying to cover up their evidence that they were there. And then here you have this major customer impacting problem that you may not detect right away. And certainly once you detect it, you're spending more time figuring out what the heck happened and before you actually can go about fixing it. But instead you went right into, here's how we're going to recover from this, because you didn't have to worry about all the things that were hidden. So, mean time to detect, mean time to repair are two metrics that are known to have a huge impact on customer perception, as well as Jim says, on top line dollars, right? It makes a big difference, those two numbers. And those two numbers are directly impacted by whether people are open in their conversation style or closed. And an open conversational style means a blameless culture.
Yeah, and if you're watching this, you're probably either a change agent or somebody who's thinking about being a change agent. And I'll just take that exact scenario. So for those of you who missed the beginning, real quickly, I'd started this job. I'd gone up and I'd already built a relationship that, hey, listen, you could tell me I'm wrong. You could tell me whatever it is. Let's talk about it. And that person was super nervous to say that they had selected, on a production database and forgot the where clause and caused this issue. But let's just look at, this is a great example of the hidden cost of a blame-filled culture. Historically, and this is a good example, is this company actually delivered a product that customers kind of like because they didn't see it. But here's what happened. There was specific things in the back office that didn't work. So it made the customer support team get upset with the tech ops team because they weren't fixing customer issues. The tech ops team was frustrated with the software team because they weren't building a back office. And what you had is you started building a bigger and bigger tech ops team and a bigger and bigger customer service team, inefficiency, because no one actually got to the root cause, because no one brought everybody together. So a blameless culture, I want to make sure, is it's not just an engineering thing, it's a company thing.
Yeah.
Anything to add, Jim or Lee, on that? Otherwise, I got another good question.
Well, I mean, just on the whole company thing. So, yeah, I mean, back when I ran the engineering organization, I was acutely aware of often the blame that got passed around between sales and marketing and product management and engineering, because everybody's working towards shared goals as a company. And if you're not making your shared goals as as a company, there's this like, well, which group is essentially letting us down? So, I mean, believe me, like at Blameless, the whole company operates with this model, not just the engineering team delivering the software. But, like that isn't the case everywhere. But the more you can push towards that just as an entire company, I think you're much better off. And I'm sure everybody on this call has witnessed some form of that in their career. Tech is stressful, fast paced, and there's often, plenty of blame to go around if that's how you look at it, as opposed to plenty of learning opportunities so we all can get better, which is another way to look at the same thing. But yeah, I would say, holistically, a blameless culture really just makes everything you do stronger, better, more effective, more efficient.
Yeah, and I'll just add a quick hack, I'll call it that, is if you only have kind of the blameless culture within your engineering organization, just consider making your retrospectives a company thing, not a technology thing. Because a lot of times the reason something happened is maybe we underinvested in it for years. And so if you can bring, or maybe something was misrepresented or whatever it is, but bring in to make sure you're really digging into the root cause. Lee, sorry, is there anything else you wanted to add on that one?
No, I was just going to completely agree that the problems with finger pointing within an organization are 10 times worse when you're going between organizations. And so when engineering decides not to share openly with sales and with customer support, and customer support doesn't share with engineering, and sales doesn't trust engineering, those dynamics are killers for any company. Whether you're talking about top line dollars or bottom line dollars, customer satisfaction, mean time to repair issues. whatever metric you want to do, everything is negatively affected in that model. But I think, like you said, Ken, I think most of the people on this call are probably change agents and probably are already aware of that. But I guess the $1 million question is, what can we do about that?
Yeah, agreed. All right, so Lee, let's jump over. And by the way, we'll say this again at the end. Feel free to reach out to any of us on LinkedIn, personally, if there's any way we can help you in your organization. It has nothing to do with selling any Blameless software. We just enjoy doing that. Lee, let's go to AWS. Interesting company, thousands and thousands and thousands of services, fast moving, fast pace. I think you built Beanstalk, if you haven't used that back in the day. But how does blamelessness facilitate better problem solving and innovation within teams?
Oh, that's a good question. I think the biggest cultural driver at AWS in general is the customer-centric focus that carries over from the rest of Amazon. That is, the customer is always right. Unfortunately, that it both enables a blameless culture because it encourages creating systems that solve problems, not blame the people who cause problems. But it can actually encourage the blameful culture as well too. When customers are affected, all it takes is one manager to stand up and say, "Who did this?" And the whole thing can fall apart. And we had a share of that as well too. So, even though I'd say in general we had the right culture, the right blameless culture, it wasn't easy to keep it going, and nor was it universal. And so I think that maybe brings up another point, and maybe I'd love to get Jim's thoughts on this one in particular. Even if you have a blameless culture, how do you keep it going? How do you maintain it in light of the fact that individuals are in that culture and individuals have different mindset and beliefs and problems that can occur? I'd love to get your thought on
Yeah.
that as well.
It reminds me of discussions we had in the early days of New Relic. We felt very good about the culture that we were building because the company was small and we were all of a like mindset and it was sort of easy to control. As we got bigger, this is always the question. Does the culture change because you're bringing in so many new people? Like, how strong is the culture? So, I mean, I can't imagine, what you saw at AWS, which was a much, much bigger organization. And like, how do you, again, keep your culture intact? So I'll go back to what I said before. If you really want to be more than words and you really want it to be actions, then as your company scales and as the organization gets bigger, you need to have a structure in place that essentially reinforces the culture, right? And so that's what meetings are on the calendar every week and what is the official process if there's an outage, and am I checking in to make sure it's being followed as the leader of the organization? Because in that way, people can't really escape that structure. And you may have somebody who naturally doesn't like that and is trying to hide from the culture. In other words, they really are outliers to the culture that you're trying to create. So one of two things happens at that point. They either get on board because they're kind of forced to, the structure kind of keeps everybody in line, or it becomes obvious to everybody that we have a problem on our hands and we have somebody who is actively disregarding our cultural norms and what's important to us. And at that point, you have a tough decision, but we have let people go who really were not upholding the culture that we had set for ourselves. But it's clear that that's happening because you're forcing them into these structures, and if they don't really participate, if they reject it, then you know that they're not really up for that particular job with that particular culture that you're driving towards.
Sometimes it's hard to see, the contributions someone makes, but if they have the wrong cultural mindset, those
Yeah.
contributions can easily be overshadowed by the cultural negative impacts it can have to the culture.
Think about this similar thing too, Lee. We have this like, no asshole rule at New Relic, and a lot of companies try to do that because that's a whole different cultural problem is when you got, the people that they, speak over and they dominate conversations and they're just jerks. Like that has a tendency to take a culture down as well. And you may get those people. You may get all different kinds of people. It's hard to hire. You hire, you bring them in, and so you do need to be on the lookout. And if you don't take care of it, like you can lead to bigger problems. And because this is the weird thing, if others see that they can get away with things, oh, this person over here isn't following the rules as laid out, well, then I don't have to follow the rules. And then all of that stuff kind of can break down. So you got to stay vigilant and stay on top of it.
Yeah,
And I think a good thing that kind of a corollary to that is sometimes there's organizations, I've been in organizations like this where they have a good culture, they have a culture that they're encouraging throughout the organization, but they allow exceptions for various reasons, whether we're talking the founder or the engineer that does 90% of the code for the product, or the salesperson that's 10 times quota all the time. There's always these special cases, and having those special cases can destroy an organization very quickly as well.
Yeah. Two thoughts I have is I always think, a lot of times people think a blameless culture means that there's no accountability. I think that's a false narrative.
No.
You're
Yeah.
just being transparent. It is what it is. We're talking through it. Just like sometimes I hear people say agile means that there's no deliverables from a date or timing perspective. No, we still have to deliver software in a certain time. So I want us to pivot over to, really talking about, I think kind of we've hit on, people know it's important, but how do you actually bring it to life? But before we do that, Ed gave us a really good question, so I'm going to put that out there. I have seen an industry trend on deliverable products that is more cost efficient to eliminate QA testing and accept higher return repairs. With manage adapting this, how do we keep management away from this mentality, including the QA testing, when the industry pushes this? So I have some thoughts, but let me turn it over to Jim, maybe you, and then Lee for after.
Yeah, well, if you can repair problems very quickly, I think there is a reasonable case to be made to take on more quality risk with the product. So, just a little bit of a history lesson. I started my career at Apple, and we would work for a year and a half, 2 years on a major system software release, and we would ship it out to millions of computers. And it was really hard to fix those things because the internet, was just barely getting started when I was at that phase of Apple. So we invested a massive amount of money in quality assurance because it was so difficult to catch problems. When I started at New Relic, we had a fairly large QA team, but what we came to realize is it just was really hard to replicate the problems we would see in production environments. And there was also this unfortunate cultural thing that developed where the engineers writing the code just didn't really think about the quality because someone else was going to find the bug. And we realized that, actually we sort of had an issue on our hands. And so we sort of scaled down the size of the QA team, but really told developers they were on the hook for quality, and they were also on call if problems happened. They were getting paged in the middle of the night. And we forced developers to think more about it. Now, we did have a higher defect rate, but it wasn't a lot higher because, again, it's really hard to simulate production environments in testing. And what we always committed to fixing defects very rapidly so that they wouldn't, really impact a lot of people. And sometimes we'd have, slow rollouts and feature flags that we could have, 10 people try the product or feature, and 100, then everybody had access to it. And so, we sort of learned our way through how to navigate that. So I would say there's definitely like no right or wrong answer. But if you can update software quickly, you might take on a little more risk appropriately. Now, if it's getting out of hand and the quality of the product is very poor, you know, reliability, you know, we all think we're talking about reliability, and generally we think of like uptime and outages. But there's also defects and low quality that can have the same impact on customers. Like a bug where it breaks the feature is no different than an outage which breaks the feature, right? The feature's broken, the customer can't use it. And this is also like a bug, you know, there's many times where an incident for us is a bug versus an outage, but something bad is happening. We have to respond very urgently and quickly to it. So that's an incident. But it could just be a defect. It could be a bug that slipped out into production just as easily as as an outage, a server being down or something like that. So I've rambled on a little bit. Lee, I don't know, or Ken, if you guys have any
Yeah.
points of view on this.
No, actually, I do. I get this QA testing question a lot in some of the consulting work that I do as well. And I think the answers are very similar to a related area, which is chaos and testing, chaos engineering. That is the idea of building a production environment with forced errors built into it and driving software to actually create problems in production on a regular basis, just so you can repair and improve the quality of the software. Yeah, the issues involved are very similar. They're trading the mechanism you use for creating customer satisfaction and reliable software. Rather, you know, in the QA testing approach, you are focusing on defect rates, while with the chaos engineering approach to higher quality, you're focused on mean time to detect problems and mean time to repair problems. And they're both viable ways of approaching it. That the key is by reducing the dependency on testing on the front end, the theory is you can move faster. Now, whether you can or not is entirely dependent on your particular system and your application. But I don't think I would be afraid of reducing QA testing just because you're afraid it's going to reduce quality. I think there are strategies that you can put in place that can actually increase quality even with a decreased focus on testing.
All right, and Mike, we're gonna get to your question in a second. Ed followed on. This is more visible with deliverable products like TVs. Management adapts this mentality from deliverable entities to the software environment. Here's my take on this, Ed, is a lot of times, unfortunately, some leaders read something that says we need less QA. And so they go into their company and they say, you know, industry trend is we need less QA, so let's just have less QA. What they forgot to read is the other details, in my opinion, of how they have less QA. That's because they've got better test coverage. They're probably in microservices. So they've basically reduced the blast radius. Jim, I think about it, New Relic, like I think every day we probably release, 75 times to production from people code, but there was a series of tests that went on. And then you think even tests when it went into production, if a lot of unknown errors, I think this happens at AWS too, even if something flows into production and there's detection of errors, then it automatically reverts it in many cases. So I would say from my perspective, I think you can have less QA, but you don't just magically say I need less QA. You have to put those technology frameworks in place to kind of protect that less manual QA system. Otherwise, you'll just have problems.
Yeah, absolutely. You can't trade a higher defect rate without lowering a detection and repair rates. You just can't do that. And the example that's used here, like TVs and physical products, is the mean time to repair a television defect is, first of all, very, very, very expensive. It's also very, very time consuming, and because many of them can't be repaired at all. And so you can't do the same type of QA process for a physical product that's delivered to a consumer that you can for a SaaS application that you can change 70 times a day. So you have to have a testing strategy that is consistent with the rest of your reliability processes that are in place on the entire spectrum, the development, the testing, and the operation side.
Can I add one thing to this, Ken?
Yeah, absolutely.
And maybe this, I'm also reading into Ed's comment, something to the effect of, hey, there's a real problem happening, but management doesn't really seem to get it. So, really, I think the bigger question, let's just take quality, but it could be reliability. It's in a similar vein. What is our current level of quality? What does it look like? And so, if you think that your organization is making bad decisions or underinvesting, start with evidence and data to back up your claim. While management, may have lots of ideas, they may be basing those things off of not great data. And when presented with data that would suggest there is a bigger problem, it might trigger a more open conversation about, well, what is going on, right? And so, if there's like not great transparency around quality, again, very similar. If there's not great transparency around reliability, management may just be making things up in their head, and which is not very helpful to anybody. So if you're in a situation where this is happening to you, what data can you find? Can you work with other people, collect new sources of data, and basically, you put together an evidence-based argument that is saying, again, without the blame, hey, whatever it is that we're doing today doesn't seem to be working well because here's the data that shows a problem that we're having. Okay, then hopefully people are like, oh, that's quite interesting. We have a problem. Let's work and figure out why we're having the issue and let's fix it. Again, blameless concepts applied to, quality, could be reliability as well, but I've seen the same thing with quality. But if management is making bad decisions, I would suggest, as being in a management positions in my career, maybe I'm not looking at the right data set, and that's why I've made these poor decisions.
Yep, makes sense. All right, I'm gonna go, Mike. You have a good question. I think when you're talking about EOS, you're talking about the entrepreneurial operating system. The question was, how does a blameless culture different from an EOS culture? And I'll take that first, if it's okay with you, Jim and Lee, and then you could jump in if you have anything you want to add. From my perspective, of course, EOS is a whole company structure in itself. So it's, there's a focus on the framework itself. I think, from the core components, a little bit different. Vision, people, data, process, traction, are typical things that you focus on. And then, implementation is, again, is a lot of times focused on that process. On a blameless culture, I think the focus is really on kind of that cultural piece of like, how do we communicate data without pointing fingers? I think the core principle of a blameless culture really is the psychological safety. And there's a lot of books. Like I love, I've got a lot of books behind me. Lee and I wrote a book, Business Breakthrough 3.0. But psychological safety is something that's very, very critical because we're all humans in the way we operate. And so I think that it really is, it's really that very focused part on psychological safety is, I think, one of a key differentiator. And again, I'm a big fan of both. I don't think one necessarily can't be without the other. And again, implementation on a blameless culture is really much more focused on behaviors and the culture we're trying to create of being open and transparent and, hey, I messed up, or hey, this happened, versus as much the process. But they're both great things. I don't know, Lee or Jim, if you want
Hey,
to add something to that.
King, would it be safe to say that EOS cultural changes are very outward focused and blameless cultural changes are more inward focused? Is that a good generalization, or
You
am I
could, I would say
missing
it's more
something there?
structural. I think EOS is a
Okay.
lot more structural because it's by design a whole company system.
Okay.
Can you talk to, like, in some ways it's how you treat people too? And, so if you're treating people by blaming them, they're going to respond in a very negative way, and no one's going to be safe, right? So the minute you pick out one person, publicly humiliate them and blame them for an outage, everyone sitting in that room just witnessed what you did, and now they're scared, and now they're really not going to be, like, behave professionally. They're going to just be frightened, and because they don't want to be called out publicly or something like that. So I like how you've said it. It's really more it's really kind of how you're treating people. And that's a really important part of building that psychological safety and strength, you know, and Google has seen this, plenty of research, the power of psychological safety to productivity. There's a lot of connections there.
Yeah, and Mike, hopefully that answers. I've seen companies, I've been able to work with a lot of people where they have got a great EOS implementation and don't have a blameless culture, or do have a blameless culture. So I don't know if it's that they're against each other, just a different structure, and you can have a blameless culture or not a blameless culture running EOS, at least in my experience. So hopefully that helps a little bit. All right, shifting a little bit, for the time we have left. Let's go into kind of implementation of a blameless culture. You know, I guess, Jim, I'll ask you, like, we talked about establishing open channels for communications and regular retrospectives, because I think a lot of people don't understand that retrospective done right, I think super important. How did you encourage, and maybe also how did you encourage and how could other people encourage that open communication and making that retrospective something
Yep.
more important versus a
Yep.
task to be completed? Because I always think as a retrospective, it's not a task to be completed, it's an outcome to be achieved.
Yeah. Well, okay. So the truth is, if you just walked into, say like a more immature operating environment and you said, I want to see retrospectives, people would probably phone it in and they would check the box and they would get through it. And they wouldn't probably really do it in a professional manner. And doing a quality retrospective is important so that you get the benefit from it. If you don't put the work in, you don't get the benefit out. So one hack or trick that we did is we assigned one person internally to hold everybody else accountable for high quality retrospectives. And so, and this is kind of when SRE started to get some momentum. And so you maybe had like a head of SRE or just someone you said, okay, you're the head of reliability. Maybe you do other things in your day job, whatever, but you're going to be the head of reliability. And so what I want you to do is make sure that everyone is doing retrospectives when there's any kind of serious outage, and you review the retrospective to make sure it's up to a quality standard. And that way you have an internal advocate who's kind of, again, holding everybody else accountable to make sure that that's being done right. And so you need someone in a leadership position to basically designate that. And then everybody knows they can't phone it in and that they have to do a reasonable job with it. I would say there's a natural tendency to underinvest if people are not held accountable. Developers are busy. They want to get back to whatever they were doing. And so to do one of these things where you stop for a bit, go back in time and relive the pain, there's a natural reluctancy to want to do it. So you kind of have to have a counterbalancing force that just says, look, we get it. It's painful to go through, relive history. All the mistakes are brought to light, but it's important to the organization, so we're going to do it. And we've designated this one person to make sure it's getting done properly. And that one person, if it was, like the police force, you have the internal affairs division, and they hold the police accountable to make sure the police are doing their job. You need that internal, person that really does that. I've found, and then it's done properly.
I think one important thing to add to that as well is accountability and blamelessness aren't opposites. And they sound like opposites and they may seem like opposites, but they're not. You still have to have accountability in a blameless culture, but the accountability comes from the culture and the advantages of things that you do within a culture, not from blameful versus blameless. But I think it's important to keep that in mind because I've worked with managers. I'm thinking one in particular. I won't say where or when, but he was very much a focus on accountability and making sure that, kind of playing the role you were talking about, Jim, making sure that people were accountable for the problems that they were for the incidents that they were responsible for, and making sure that resolutions happen. But he did it in such a way that came across in a very blameful manner. So it was like, you're not done with your retrospectives. So and so is, your team is way behind. You need to do this. And the whole mindset was focused on a blame culture built around the idea of these blameless ideas, right? So you got to be really careful that, and I'm saying this to you know this, Jim, obviously, but I'm saying this to everyone who's listening. You got to be really careful to keep those two things in mind and realize they're not opposites. They're complementary and they're both required. Blamelessness and accountability.
Sounds good. I'm going to fast forward a little bit because I want to see if we can get a couple of the lightning round questions in. But Aaron, I want to ask if you could just post the link to the next webinar. Just a quick promo. One of the things a lot of people have asked is like sometimes things are not right, not modern in your organization, but how do you really make a business case to change? Sometimes it's a financial business case for investment. Sometimes it's just operating different. How do you present that? And we've been able to work with a lot of companies that were going through those pivotal changes. So we're going to have a nice section coming up. So Aaron, again, if you could post that in the chat, where we're going to dig into how do you make a business case? How do you actually get started? So I think hopefully that will be helpful for everybody. So we'll pass that in. And just go to one more question before we do the lightning round. Jim and Lee, can you give an instance where a blameless culture helped your team navigate a challenging incident? Maybe one at AWS, Lee, maybe Jim, maybe pick New Relic or Apple or wherever you want.
Well, there were so many. I mean, I can certainly, of hundreds of instances come up with somewhere where they weren't handleable and some that were. I'm not sure easy to come up with one and talk about it in a generic way. I know one of the biggest incidences that kind of established for me the idea that visibility was important and positive versus negative was one that occurred at Amazon very early in my career at Amazon. That is, I was responsible. I owned the front page of the website during a massive migration that was going on, and one of my engineers flipped a feature flag switch, and suddenly the entire front page disappeared. Nobody on it. This is Amazon.com's homepage. Nobody saw anything on the homepage, and it was so tempting to go into the mindset of it was a mistake. Just turn it back on again. Nobody will notice. But what we did instead was we looked at why was it so easy to flip that switch to that brings down the entire site, and what can we do to prevent that from happening in the future? And that focus made it such that we put in process changes to make sure we can never do that again.
Yeah, just one thing. I think that's the important part into that retro is if the emphasis again is the history lesson, which really doesn't help.
Right.
Like what was the underlying thing that we can fix? So again, given the same set of circumstances, how do we have a different outcome? Jim, anything else
Exactly.
pop to mind to you as like a clear
Yeah,
incident?
there's one particular incident we have. It was actually a data leakage problem where some of our customer data leaked into another customer's account because we were multi-tenant SaaS. And so if you have a coding error or a bug in your code, this can sometimes happen where you get data leakage. And, I will admit that like when I first learned of the leakage, I was pretty upset. Like I was angry. Because I knew that I had to basically go on a customer tour and explain to everybody why this thing happened and is your data really private and safe with New Relic, right? So very, very stressful. And so my initial emotion was really, anger. I kept that to myself. I didn't project that to the team. I started to dig into it with the team, and in my head, I'm thinking to myself, someone probably is totally lazy or really messed it up. Why I thought that, I don't know, but you're in a management position, something bad happens. Maybe it's easier to assume somebody screwed it up. And then the more I worked through it with the team, I was actually very impressed with how the team had built our software to prevent this situation from happening and how this actually was an extremely rare edge case. And I reviewed the code personally because I was still doing a lot of coding at that time. And actually, I came away feeling much more confident in the team and what they had done and realized that even great teams, these things can happen. And really, nobody was at fault. Nobody was to blame. But we all learned a lot from going through it together. But it was a very stressful thing for me as the leader of the organization because I had the head of sales, I had the head of customer success just, beating me up metaphorically of like, how could you let this happen? And don't you guys know like what you're doing and is what's going on over there and blah, 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 all that stuff, right? And it's not fun to go through that. But again, I felt really, really confident and strong the more I dug into that particular incident that the team actually really did know what they were doing. And it's one of these things that would have been really, really hard to have prevented. It's a really, really rare edge case in the code, and none of our testing caught it, and we had never caught it up until that point. And then it revealed itself. The bug kind of revealed itself. This pattern happens a lot. You have a latent bug, you just never run into it. Something else changes, and now you're running into this issue that you never had before.
All right. We're going to go into the lightning round. Hopefully people enjoy it. Whoever goes, you got 30 seconds to answer the question. So we'll see how we can get through these. You can volunteer for the last few minutes, make it a little bit exciting. If anybody pops in and you can throw a lightning question on us. All right, first one. How do we handle situations where individuals clearly made a mistake? Anybody want to go first?
Failure is good, not bad. As long as you learn from your mistakes, you absolutely want to have a culture that encourages people to make mistakes as long as you learn from mistakes. You don't learn if you don't make mistakes.
Yeah, addressing the root cause and preventing the future recurrence versus punishing individuals makes sense.
Yeah.
All right, what process do we need to implement to facilitate blameless incident reviews and root cause analysis?
That's the retrospective process, which we've talked a little bit about. And again, I think it's nice if you assign an internal champion, because retros done right are actually kind of tricky. There's a lot that goes into it, and you want to make sure you do it right to get the value.
Yeah, and I just add in, I think the consistency is key. So if you have an individual or whatever, just a set of practices, because if it's different for each person, then you don't really have a retrospective process, in my opinion. How do we encourage employees to report errors and near misses without fear of repercussions? I'll take that.
It takes time. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Lee.
I was just going to say it takes time, and people have to see the leadership practicing that, and single mistakes by leadership showing the opposite will ruin the culture. And so you have to show consistency in the example you're trying to give, and only once you've shown consistency will everyone else come on board.
I agree. You can drive accountability. To me, it's psychological safety, open communications, confidentiality, and again, positive reinforcement if someone actually steps up and says, hey, I forgot the where clause. How do we measure the effectiveness of our blameless culture efforts? Maybe we got this approved by the boss, we're changing to blameless culture, but where's the results?
I'll take that one. If you can measure actual downtime and map it to downtime that the team acknowledges, you might find a gap. In other words, you might find that people are hiding or not reporting properly. That's one approach. The other is it's not a bad idea to poll employees periodically, and this is a topic area that you could poll them for. How safe do you feel raising your hand if you identify a problem or notice something or report an issue? Do you feel safe doing that? You can do internal surveys and try to tease that out.
Makes sense. What are the potential risks of implementing a blameless culture? Pause. I'll take that one. I think that's the same one we talked about before, is people think a blameless culture means no accountability. Simply not the case. Just like an agile, being an agile organization doesn't mean you have no deliverables. We build software, eventually it comes out. I think that both of those are not true, but again, it's all around that process that you're focused on. Do last questions. How can we sustain a blameless culture over time?
I'll take that. It sustains over time by repeatability and habit, and creating structure that people can't escape it, basically. So the only option is for it to continue because of the things that you've put into place, the things that you enforce, reinforce, all those things have to just happen continually, and then people get the hang of it. And believe me, they will be happier in a blameless culture. And so all your employees will work to enforce it because it's a very positive culture to work in. It's a productive one. It generates business results. Once you get into that culture, it will more or less keep going unless leadership typically will do something to kind of torpedo it.
Yeah, and I'll just add to anybody driving change. If you haven't seen it, go Google the Kubler-Ross change. It's the same thing. If you if you start a culture of blamelessness and that transparency, at first people are going to feel uncomfortable. What does this mean? Then as long as you reinforce it, have the training, and celebrate the successes, because we're all humans and we like to celebrate wins, then you kind of have that continuous reinforcement in my experience. So I totally agree with what you said, Jim. So I think we're wrapping up on time. Jim, Lee, thanks again. Hopefully this was helpful to
Thanks,
everybody,
Ken.
and we're going to put this in replays. Next one, I'm really excited because I think the biggest thing I've seen with people is they know they need to change operationally, not just a blameless culture, but maybe the way they do incident management, but how they articulate, people investment, time investment. We're going to hit that on the next webinar. Jim, you want to take us out?
Yeah. Hey, thanks, Ken. This has been great. Appreciate everybody attending. Lots of great questions. Yeah, look forward to the next one.
All right. Take care, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you all.